Well, it's my pleasure. I'm Ashley Griffin to join you today with eXtension and the professional development activities that we offer to our membership, and specifically the Diversity and Inclusion Issue Corps. Today we have with us Dr. Shane Brott, and he is from the University of New Hampshire, and he has been teaching geospatial workshops in Extension for over 15 years. He has served as the leader of the MapAssist community of practice, as many of you have maybe heard from that group over the years that have been involved with eXtension. And he has really been a driving force behind the work that we've done with Issue Corps in the last few years, now our impact collaboratives, as we move forward with being a key informant. And he has been able to provide a lot of valuable information and tools and services that have been incorporated into those projects. So we're really happy today to have Shane with us to actually give us some more hands-on information for that. Shane?
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mark and Ashley and everyone else, for the invitation to present on the idea of how story maps could be used to engage your audience in Extension. And just as a quick double check, are you seeing the full slide, or are you seeing the presenter view on your screen?
We're seeing the full slide, yeah.
Okay, great. So part of the idea behind this, generally speaking, what we've been trying to do in the past few years is to think about how mapping can be used to engage audiences and to interact with audiences. And to be perfectly honest, there's nothing specific that Extension has to do that many of our clients don't already do. So the good thing about it is that any workshops that we teach the public along these lines are definitely also useful for folks in Extension. But at the same time, there's plenty of examples of maps and stories that are more, I would say, promotional rather than engaging or trying to present information. So a lot of our efforts, and my effort specifically, has been in examining how can you use story maps and online mapping to truly interact with or present information in a compelling way. And as Ashley mentioned, just briefly, I am from the University of New Hampshire, and I thought I would put up there the several ways I've been involved with the Extension. Of course, I didn't even put the issue cores, which I should have put, but involved in the geospatial technology community of practice, also involved with several innovation grants, one of which just got funded, and hopefully you'll be hearing more about soon if you pay attention to mapping stuff that's going on in and through eXtension. What we're here today to talk about is this idea of story mapping, or using online maps to engage audiences. And I will say, first of all, that one of the reasons we chose to use this specific type of story mapping from a company called Esri is that it seemed to offer the most potential capabilities across the entire spectrum of both storytelling and mapping. The idea of story maps is not exclusive to Esri. It is something that other folks have thought about, have used. The idea of using interactive online maps to tell stories, again, can be done in a lot of ways. And even the idea of creating something similar to Esri story maps using an open source option exists out there. But when you look at all of the combined potential, it seems that Esri story maps really rise to the top. And I think one of the things that's really important to consider is everybody likes to think that online maps are useful, or at least I do, or many people think that they are. But the question you always have to ask yourself when you're creating an online map is what is your message? What is the story you're telling? What is going to compel people to interact with that map? And often when presented with interactive online maps, people might look at it a little bit, zoom around, click on a few points, but it doesn't give you a lot of ability to tell a story or to guide people through, or to have a specific chain of events or points of interest that you'd like people to view. And while there are different ways you could do that in well-designed maps, one of the beautiful things behind Esri story maps is that there's lots of capabilities to include a whole variety of types of media, including maps, as you can see here in this example from Connecticut's Changing Landscape story map from UConn. You have maps, it has a legend, it's interactive, you have text, you have links, you have images, graphics. All of this can be fit into a narrative flow. And that's one of the things I find most compelling about story maps. And as soon as story maps started to emerge in the landscape, I thought this is the perfect tool for Extension. because it allows you to create some sort of message that you hope people will be able to follow even when you're not there in person. And of course, one of the ideas people ask is, when is the right time to use a story map? Do you use it without seeing people face to face? Do you use it to send out before you see people? You know you're going to see them, so you send out a story map so they can explore things. Do you use it during a meeting? Maybe instead of a PowerPoint presentation, use that as an interactive way to display information? Or do you have a meeting, talk about certain content, and then send people home with the link so that they can look at the story map and get some of the same ideas out of it? And of course, the answer to all of those is yes. Yes, you can use it if you never see people, and yes, you can use it at any stage of the interaction with people that you will see in person. And that's one of the things that make them so powerful. The last point I'll make is, instead of thinking of story maps as maps, you really should think about them as fairly easy to design, cool looking, potentially very useful interactive websites that you can design with no experience whatsoever in coding, which also can feature maps. So when you decide, out of the vast universe of story maps, you have this idea in your head and you have a story, which of these are potentially useful? How could I best use what's available? I always tell people, first you need to think about your story, because if you get driven too much by the technology, you wind up sometimes getting led astray. So think carefully through, what is the point of the story that you're trying to tell, and then try to decide, out of all of the types of story maps out there, which one could be most appropriate for you to use. So this is a moving target in a good way, and I guess also sometimes in a frustrating way, that there are more of these that evolve all the time, that are released. So as of right now, these are all of the templates of story maps that exist. And again, you don't have to know anything about coding or programming at all to use these. Now, if you do know coding or programming, or you're willing to learn, there's always more modifications that you can make. But everything that I'm talking about today is just simply having an account for the site, going, logging in, and then being able to use a template online to create your story map. And at the very end of the presentation, we'll talk about accounts and what that means, and how you could get one if you don't have one. So before I go any farther, I just want to see if there's been any accumulated questions so far that I should answer before I proceed.
No, we're good, Shane.
Okay, great. So out of these types that exist, and you can see them all there, so I won't bother to read the names, there are several different categories, at least in my mind, of what these could be used for. First is if you have maps that you'd like to show off, that you would like to use as part of a story, a tale, a way to engage, you can use any of these if you have maps that you'd like to display. Figuring out which one of these and how to use them when you have maps, there's no right answer or wrong answer. It depends on what your point of emphasis is. But the point is, you have a map, you'd like to share it. All of these could potentially be used. Now, interestingly enough, out of all of these that are here, even though you could use your maps, only 2 of them actually require that you have your own maps. Now, this might seem strange, but once we start looking at examples of these, you'll see. And again, think of these mostly as interactive, slick websites which could feature maps. There's a couple of these that definitely require that you have maps. The Basic and the Swipe Spyglass, you cannot use without your own maps that you've created. But all of the rest, if you just have either pictures that you want to show, or you have a whole bunch of different content, including websites, videos, pictures, text, graphics, all of those in blue may be potentially useful for you to share your information. So what you'll see at the end of this presentation is that there's an additional webinar coming up in a few weeks that talks about, if you really want to use maps as a key part of your story map, how do you do it? But the reason we flipped the order from what my normal order is because even if you don't have any maps, or you have a story to tell that might have a map, but you don't have the map yet, you can still start using story maps as a way to engage people. So again, most of them, you don't necessarily have to have maps to use. If you have a lot of pictures you'd like to show, there are 3 specific ones that are the best at it. All of them can have pictures, and you can use picture as a feature, but what I'm thinking about is you want an interactive map that has all of these points that lets you scroll around the map and click on the points and see the picture in an attractive format. Again, all of these could feature pictures, but these three are the best at doing that. I have pictures, I know where they are on the ground, I'd like to display them and share them with people. And then finally, if your goal is to really control a narrative or tell a tale, or to have a whole bunch of sequential steps that people can take and to follow and present a wide variety of information, these are the three best. All of these can be positioned, the entire set of story maps can be positioned so that you could potentially tell a story. But the three that I've highlighted here are the best at telling a story because it allows you to really control the sequence of the way things are presented. So, as you can see, there's lots of different options. You have to consider what your goal is and what one might work best. The reality is that in GIS, usually you can make things work, even if they're not supposed to work, or you have to figure out how to get your point across within the confines of what the software lets you do, but usually there's lots of different options. However, if you are going to, as a first cut, try to decide which direction should I go in, this kind of gives you an idea of all of the different tendencies or what each type could be used for best. And when you go to Esri's website and you try to create one of these, they'll even say you would like this, or this, or ask the pros, let them help you. And it's fairly simple, but it does have a little step-by-step process to try to lead you down the path to the story map, which would be more than likely useful in the situation that you're encountering. So what I'm going to do is just look at a few story maps as examples that meet these different categories. And these categories aren't official categories, or just things that the way that I think about the maps, but I think they capture the vast majority of the uses of story maps. Any other questions before I move on to looking at the story maps? See if this is going to work. Okay, what are you seeing now? Are you seeing the map?
We're seeing the green map.
Okay, great. So one of the examples that I said was that you require maps, and you had the basic map and what's called the spyglass or swipe. So one of the things that's interesting about this sort of map, and this same exact thing is happening again. Let me try to get back into this. There we go. Of this sort of map is, as we saw in that very first example of the map with a few points, there was really sort of no call to action, or why would you engage, or how would you engage with that map. And so this spyglass, which also has another version called the swipe tool, allows you to take either two maps, and in this case it's aerial photos and land cover, or one layer on a map, and lets you interact with it. So in this case with the spyglass, if you wanted to drag and see, for example, you live around this lake, and you wanted to see around this lake, what does the land cover look like related to the aerial photo, you can drag this around and then be able to get a glance at one data layer while seeing the other data layer at the same time. Now this may seem simplistic in some ways, but this can be very powerful because people can be very engaged by looking through and examining this information in a way that wouldn't necessarily be if either of those layers were alone, or, as in the typical situation, you had a map that had a bunch of layers on it that you could turn on and off individually, and you might say, hey, go to this map and turn on and off these different layers and look to compare. If you put this spyglass instead here, it makes it very easy for people to compare them, and they're drawn to compare it. There's another version called the swipe, which basically is just one checkbox difference in the settings, and it allows you to have two sides of the screen with a little line running up and down that you can move back and forth to reveal the different sections. So while this isn't a story per se, it does provide this element of interaction, and it calls for people to go through and start to examine the map in a way that would be very difficult for them to do naturally if you just simply had these two data layers, or, for example, a side-by-side map with one data layer and the other. Now, part of the reality, you might think, well, how difficult is this to do? It's fairly simple. If you create each of these online maps, which again, next webinar will focus on that, all you have to do is go to a template, say, I want this map on the bottom, this other map on the top, tweak a few or choose a few settings, and click save, and it produces this automatically. So it's very, very easy to make assuming that you have your maps together. And it's a pretty powerful way to have people interact with information that you've provided.
And Shane, there's a question in the Q&A from Katie, and hopefully I will get this correct. She's asking, do you have evidence or research about the spyglass and how it engages people better than side by side or layer on, layer off, she means, I guess. So maybe
yeah.
So do you have research or evidence, I guess, about I guess, is there anything about it, I guess, besides just these two options? I apologize, Katie, and you might.
No, I think I understand. Yeah, I think I understand. Research-based evidence, no, and that would be fascinating. I hope that somebody, feel free to get in touch with me and with ideas if you'd like to try to explore this. From actual evidence of watching people, it's clear that this just engages people right away. Where I've seen lots of people, including folks in Extension in New Hampshire, who I've tried to sit with to work on maps. And if the idea is here, turn on and off these layers and squint at the map and try to look at the differences, they're much less likely to see the differences, and they usually stop using it fairly quickly, where people with the spyglass and the swipe tool explore it longer. Just I've witnessed this happening in the classes, but any tangible research, I don't know. The question is too, will people actually notice there are layers to turn on and off? And will they do that? Because part of the reality of these maps is this thing's sitting right in the middle of the map when it turns on, and it's obviously different. So in a way, even without being told to, a lot of people will look and put their mouse on it and sort of instinctively click and move it around. I've seen many maps that have legends off to the side or have layers you could turn on and off. And even people being aware of the fact that you can do it and then being called to do it can be trickier than this thing plopping in the middle of the map, or the swipe tool having this line running up and down with two obviously different maps on each side. So I'd love to see the research, but anecdotally and from what I've observed, this definitely causes people to interact with the map more. Does that result in them knowing more about it? I don't know. At least you're getting them to explore it more.
She says that's great. Thank you. Kim has also asked, how do users know what the various colors inside the spyglass represent? Is there a key to your map?
Yes, I have to admit, I was looking for an example of this, and this is not a full map. I borrowed, shall we say, a portion of a map. So this would not be a single standalone map because there would be a legend on this. Yes, so I would say this is a component of another map that I borrowed only for this purpose. But yeah, there has to be a legend. Otherwise, nobody has any idea what those colors mean. Every map needs a legend.
Okay, thank you.
Great. The other category, or another category, was no maps required at all. And this is something that I used in a presentation that I gave. So I gave a lightning talk at an extension conference. The Natural Resources and Community and Economic Development folks had a joint conference in Burlington last year. And it was a lightning talk about why you should use map in your extension work. And I thought, how you use online mapping in your extension work. So I thought, well, what a better way than to take my presentation, convert it into a story map, and then have the last link or last slide of my presentation be the URL to this story map. So people listen to me, I'll do my lightning talk, and then the last slide will have information so that they can go back and then have a story map version of it. And this is the one called Cascade, which is a bit more intense for some people, and other people like it a lot, where you have all of these different visual components, whether it's images or text blocks that you can scroll through and provide a nice narrative view of the information you're presenting. And this is my favorite slide of all time that I use for a really bad map. You should not make a map that looks like this. Now, there's nothing tremendously fancy about this, and it doesn't, suppose it does feature one map, but that map is not an interactive map. It allows you to have this flow of information. Now, there are other ways to do this. You can create websites that look very similar to this, but being someone who's spent a decent amount of time working on websites recently, this is much, much easier to create in this format. So here's an example of a story map, happens to be about mapping, but really has no interactive maps at all as part. And the very last thing I'll show of this, I'll just scroll all the way to the end, is that the last slide of this is another story map, which has many of the webinars that I've done on story mapping here embedded inside of the map. So not only can you have slides, but you can also have interactive maps as part of your story, or interactive websites as part of your story map. And I have to add tabs on here, Ashley, I've realized. I've done a few since I updated this last. So there's an example, doesn't have anything to do with interactive maps per se. Another example of, and I use the type of having, well, you wanting to feature photos, is called the shortlist. And this is a map that is in use literally as we speak today at the New Hampshire State House as a way to highlight cooperative extension activities in 2016, 2017 in the state of New Hampshire. So this map was conceived of as a way for us to talk to the public, talk to legislators, and even in some ways inform our own staff about some activities that are going on throughout the state. Did not try to put every single thing that was happening, but instead we put what we considered to be highlights chosen by the 4 program teams. And the way this map works is that as you zoom around or move around and zoom in, what's displayed over here on the side updates based on the information that's visible at a given moment. And each of these points, if you click on them here, will display an image and some information, or if you click on them here, it'll do the same thing, and you can advance through the pictures and the points either by clicking over here or clicking on these points. As we have one for all programs, we then also have different tabs that will have the different program teams and the activities going on for those program teams in that area of the state. In the background, we have just simply county boundaries. So,
Shane, can you remind
yes.
us again what the name of this map type is?
This is called Shortlist, seeming to become one of the more popular ones out there for displaying information like this. Shortlist.
Okay, there's also another question. How
Yes.
well do these maps work with screen readers? Are there any issues with accessibility?
That is an extremely good question I don't know the answer to. My assumption, which is a bad assumption, is that they thought through that fairly closely, but I would love to find out more about it. So whoever asked that question, please email me and we'll try to figure out. My email is at the end, or send it to Ashley and Mark. It's a very good question. I know that, for example, in the images, you have the ability to put alt descriptions. I don't know how it would work. I'll be interested. Also, just thinking about that for a moment, that you can, these are responsive, at least based on the screen resolution. So this is going to fool this into thinking that it's on a smartphone, for example. And so it will shift the way that it behaves. I guess it's, sometimes they don't like to be shifted in the middle of being displayed. But if you were looking at this on a smaller screen, the format of it would change. Instead of having it displayed the way it did before, you have the tabs over here, so you would click, sort of be able to zoom in and then interact with the points on a something that would work better on a smartphone screen and also on a tablet. So they've thought of that at least. How well they've done thinking about it from the standpoint of screen readers and that I would be interested to know, but I don't know.
So another question from an anonymous viewer is, do these maps work well with tables or smartphones, touchscreen type devices?
Yes, definitely. Well, yes, they're designed to work as equally well on a computer versus a touchscreen. And as you shift the size, which I just showed, they do morph and function slightly differently on those other devices, being aware of the fact that on a phone, you're not likely to be able to view something this size. And the targets switch to being tabs on the top to big blocks across the middle. So they're designed to work across all kinds of different devices, yes. And one other example just on the narrative front is here's what is called the map journal that shows if you really have a story to tell, where you could tell a story, and you are telling a story with this map, the shortlist as well, but when you go to map journal, you can almost imagine there's a big coffee table book that you're sitting down and flipping the pages, or you have a brochure that you're flipping. And the way this works is each of these bullets on the side are different sections of the map. or you can scroll down the side, and when the section flips to the next area, what's over here changes, and you can see in this case it happens to be an image. And what is over here also is highlighted, and it can be images, videos, text, graphic elements. And as you scroll through your narrative and your story, these elements change over here. So this one happens to be an interactive map that you can zoom in and out. And I think these are probably historical aerial photos, yeah, from 1934 for this area. Now, this might be the case where you'd want to use a swipe map to be able to explore the the historical aerial photos over the top of a modern map. So you can imagine, of course, that this takes a great deal of thought to stitch together your narrative, to think what would work, what doesn't work. And I'm sure that there's going to be lots of story maps that are very poor, just like there are lots of PowerPoint presentations and Prezi presentations and whatever it is that you're doing. You can also make them overwhelming or not structured efficiently. But with thought, this allows you a wonderful potential to then take your narrative and make it available to folks online. The other things to notice for this map journal is that there are elements that you can put as links here, which will then influence what is available over here. I think that's what this does, yeah. So you can have, these are called, well, they changed the name of them recently. They used to be called main stage actions. But by clicking here, you can update what's on this side. So in effect, oh, here we go, the Marsh changes swipe. In effect, you have multiple versions of this section for every narrative section that you have over here. And here's that swipe map that I was talking about, showing differences in Marsh. Wow. And here, right in the middle of the map, is a good example. And I like how they draw the star up around it, of course, to draw people's attention, but it shows you the differences historically and currently.
Well, Shane, I'd like to share with the group, Dawn Jackson put in a Q&A that the story maps are Section 508 compliant, and she provided a link. I can't copy and paste out, but if you'd like to add it to the comments for everyone, that would be excellent. Thank you.
Good. I was hoping somebody was out there who would who would know the answer to that, and I suspected they were, so that's good to know, definitely. All right, let me go back. This is going to be the one tricky part with PowerPoint. It's going to fight me on this. See if I can get back. If I can't, then we'll just move on ahead to a different format. But can I get back? Is it there? Okay. So one of the things that I do here at UNH is teach a lot of workshops, as often extension people do. And I have 2 3-hour workshops that I teach. One is called Getting to Know ArcGIS Online, which is usually a morning workshop, and then Telling Your Story with Maps, which is an afternoon workshop that directly follows it. And I would give a presentation about the types of story maps that were out there. And one of the things that somebody said to me on one of the workshops is, wow, that sounds like a great story map. Maybe you should make one of those. So I did, and the URL is here, with the understanding that this is something both that people have after the class, you could use yourself without going to the class, and it's actually now how I do the presentation during the class, where for each type of story map, if you click here on the right, it scrolls open to an example of that story map, and there's 3 little icons, or at least 2 in each. One is if you want to see the story map full screen, you can click. One is if you want to do a search on Esri's website to see other types of story maps, you can click here. And another is for the Map Assist website, which we'll talk about briefly in a few minutes. If we happen to have examples of that type of map, and those are very much geared to outreach and engagement, if we do have examples, there will be a blue icon there, and if you click on that, it will lead you to the location on our website and do a search to pull up that sort of map. So this could be used, again, for teaching. I use it for teaching, but if you wanted to show somebody what are story maps, this could be something that you could use. And this effort is largely paired with Map Assist, which, as Ashley mentioned, was a community of practice started long ago in 2006 of folks across the country who are using GIS in extension specifically as their topic. So there's a lot of folks that use GIS in the world. There's a lot of folks that use GIS for teaching. And there's even a lot of people who use GIS and GPS in extension, but there's not a tremendous amount of people who use geospatial technologies as their topic area in Extension, thinking about how could people from the state, again, as always, from a non-commercially vested or biased standpoint, how could they use the technology and to come up with ways to present information that people can come in, learn whatever they need to learn about mapping, and then go on and use it in their lives. Now, with the change in eXtension's focus from external to internal, it didn't affect us a tremendous amount because almost everything that we talk about for how conservation commissions could use mapping is equally relevant to how extension staff can use mapping. But one of the problems with our group is we had so many things that we could have potentially done. Even think about UAS or UAVs, drones, and what that could be. There's an entire different community that handled that. So recently we've really tried to pull back to think, how can we get people inspired to think about how they can use mapping for outreach engagement, and how can we provide them evidence of, or help to get them along the way. So this new website was formed about a year ago, which is trying to keep all of that in one location. And let's see if I can get there. So this is a sort of a moving target, but both I hope that this is a reference for folks who are out there in Extension, and also something that you can contribute towards, because one of the things that we think is important about inspiring people to use maps is coming up with examples of the way that maps are used in outreach and engagement. And so on the top here, just to show you briefly, we have maps, map tails, and various ways that you can learn. So what we're trying to do is compile examples of maps, and all of these, almost all of them, happen at this point to be story maps, but this is not meant to be exclusive to Esri or exclusive to story maps. It just happens to be that all of the good examples of the use of maps for outreach and engagement that we've found so far have been in this format. So if you have something that's in Google or in any of the open source, feel free to contribute it here if it's used for outreach and engagement. But we're trying to come up with a place that Extension or like-minded folks can come and see the way that certain types of mapping is being used. And this, of course, not every map is supposed to be from the perspective of our group really meant for outreach and engagement. Sometimes, to be honest, it's just, here is all the cool data that we have, which, as we all know, is not really using it for engagement. So these, I think we have about 40 maps now, and I would like to have a whole bunch more. So any of you out there that have good examples of the way that maps are being used for outreach and engagement now, we'd love to hear from you. Also, if you're so inspired by this that you go out and make maps in the future, we'd love to hear from you as well. And the way you would do that is you go to this share section, and if you're a tweeter, you can tweet it to us, or if not, you can just see her and fill out a very simple form which has just some basic information about your map. And then this map could be featured here on the site. Cool example, just recently there's this type of map called a crowdsourced story map that the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services started using to try to get people to tell them what they like about the environment in New Hampshire. And so that was featured even just a couple of weeks ago as a good way to engage people in different audiences. Now, this is not Extension, but it definitely has an Extension-like mission to both inform and engage people. And this, to me, is one of the most exciting story maps, is this crowdsourced story map, because a lot of the other story maps, if you wanted to collect information, everybody involved would have to have an Esri account. Now, with this and also another tool, which we might do in the future, Survey 123, you don't have to have an account. Anybody can just click Submit Photo who lives in New Hampshire or anywhere else. You can sign in with a variety of approaches if you'd like, or just click Guest, and it allows you to put information in here. So this is a very powerful way to engage people and collect information. And this approach only started being available in templates, I think last June or July. It hasn't been very long. And I got really excited about this. I even told one of the other folks in Extension here, wow, this really opens up the world to us gathering information from people. And she became equally excited. Nobody else understood. Everybody else just flew over their head, but she was excited. I am waiting for the day where you can configure this, because that'll really open up possibilities in collecting information from people. Supposedly it's coming or could be coming. Right now you're sort of stuck with just what's here, which is still pretty good. But if we could configure this and have drop-down menus There are other ways to do that in ArcGIS Online, but the ability to easily configure this would go a long way towards having people be able to use this.
Shane,
So,
there's two questions for
go
you.
for it.
One is, with the crowdsourced map, does the map creator have the ability to approve these uploads or shared images prior to them being
Yes.
visible on the map?
Yep, it's a setting. You can choose to let it just submit to the map automatically, or you can choose to give each entry permission, which obviously, for a lot of reasons, would be the preferred option, I would think, for most people.
Mm-hmm. And Lisa Phillips asked, do you need to be fluent in how to use ArcGIS to use Esri story maps?
No, and that's about what I'm going to do. As I just show one more thing here, is very briefly talk about that. The last thing I would just say, map tales are stories about folks in extension or in outreach using maps. We have some of those, although we'd like to have more. And then if you're interested in learning, we have, of course, the extension Ask an Expert. We have how-tos. This is not supposed to replace all of the how-tos that are out there. This is an evolving section, but we'd like it to point to efficiently either extension developed or other folks. And I know I have a whole list of things I'd like to get up here, including a link to all of the Esri resources that are out there. And of course, we have quite a few webinars that we do, and the webinars are listed here. And of course, once their recordings are available, they're also listed here. And these are the different topics that we've done so far.
Donna Coffin has asked, can the information be uploaded anonymously? Some clients don't like people knowing all their business.
You mean in the crowdsource map? Yeah, there's a guest option. Mm-hmm. So you don't necessarily have to. And of course, one of the things is how the information is uploaded. Another can be the way that you choose to display it. So you could have, depending on how much time and energy you put into it, you could always come up with a system that would let people put whatever information in that they want, but then you could not choose to share that with people. Or, as you saw right there, if you click on guest, nobody has any idea who you are. Just very briefly, if you want to do this and you're interested in getting an account, there are two types of accounts that are out there. Well, there's more than two, but basically there's two. One is a trial account, and if you go to arcgis.com and click Try ArcGIS, you will get a free trial for 60 days of the paid account. If you want to create a free public account, which you can see is meant for non-commercial use, you can click, when you go to this webpage, arcgis.com, you go up to the upper right, there's a button that says Sign In. If you click on Sign In, it brings you to this page, which allows you to create a free public account. You can also sign in with Facebook and Google Plus if you want to, which basically creates a public account for you. Almost any of the story mapping can be done with either of these. The big difference is the crowdsource map. If you're collecting data, you do need the paid account. Since a lot of folks on this should be, or at least my understanding is that most folks are an extension, you likely already have access to what's called an organizational or subscription account through the university. And the folks I've talked to at the Designathons, who then went back to the universities and asked, do we have access to this account? Most of the time, from what I know, they just get a response that says, yep, we do, and here's your login. So if you're not at the university, there is obviously different pricing depending on who you are. And even within your site license at the university, you're going to have to find the right person and see the situation. But you are, as a university employee, very likely to have access. And the big differences between the public and the paid, although there are other differences, the three I think that are the most relevant for us is, number one, your ability to control information. In your public account, either everything is hidden behind, you can only see it with your login, or everybody can see it. Those are your two options. With an organizational or subscription account, you have a lot of different capabilities. You can create groups. You can let people in certain groups see things and other groups not. You can even have people from other universities, and you can invite them in with their account into your group to collaborate. So there's a lot of ability to control access to data and make it only selectively available. You can also do geospatial analysis in that environment. So you could do buffering, or you could calculate buffering. You could calculate, well, I could go on for a long time, but you could do geocoding, where you could take information from addresses and plop them in points in the map. That you cannot do with the free public account. You can only do with the paid account. And mobile mapping, which we haven't talked about at all really in this, except the idea that you can take information and submit it to the map, a la crowdsource map. You can also configure smartphones or tablets to go out in the field and collect data and automatically submit it to a map. That's why the crowdsourced map, story map, you have to have the paid account, because that ability to remotely contribute data, you need the paid account. That being said, only the person who creates the crowdsourced story map has to have a paid account. Everybody else does not have to. But those are the three biggest differences. Well, I'm not going to belabor it too much, because likely a lot of people here have access to a university account if they would only ask for it. And just finally, the question is, well, how difficult is it to use story maps? Do you need to know anything about ArcGIS Online? And in some ways you need to know a little, and it depends really on how many maps you have. So if you want to add a lot of maps, interactive maps to your story maps, you do need to know more. And if you want to have those interactive maps, I suggest you tune into the next webinar that we do, because it'll be a lot more focused, or actually completely focused on the map section. But the beautiful thing that happened, I think about 1.5 years ago, is that Esri created this story map page, which is so nice and a lot easier to use for new users, which I think it was the goal, than ArcGIS Online. And so if you go to storymaps.esri.com and you click on My Stories, it has this very nice user interface where it shows all of the different story maps that you have created over time. So here's that mapping your way to better engagement map that I showed. And when you click on it, it has this nice interface where you can look at all these different settings. But if you want to create a story map, when you first log in, there'll be a big button here that says Create Map. But if you create a story after that, when you click Create Story, you can see just briefly how the templates look. You can also see, obviously, where I borrowed those icons from. But as you go through, for example, you want to create a map journal. So you click on this, and it brings you to this interface, which gives you a lot of very simple choices, all of which are undoable. So you say, do you want on the side or floating? Oh, if you're not sure what those look like, you can view a live example, and you click on side panel. And then you can see that this is extremely sort of graphically designed, even the template. So I say demo for extension. And then it leads you through the process. It even says, this is the main stage, this is the side panel. What would you like as the main stage content? So you either create a map or have a map you've already created, or you select an image and it shows you the various options for that, or you have a video and it gives you the various options, or you embed a web page. So let's just embed, just because we're doing this here, we'll just see if this works. And then you click configure, you have various options for what you can do. And you click next. And then you have your side panel, and here, it's called story actions now. That's what that interactive nature is called. And this is what we call the WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get, and you can type this is a story map.
This seems so much easier, Shane, than the first time I walked through one of your trainings. It's getting better and better.
Yeah, no, it's come a tremendously long way. And again, these story actions allow you to have things here in this sidebar that when you click influences what's on the main stage, which is, if you're thinking of a coffee table book analogy, it's almost as if you can open the page and then you have your text, and you can have various fold outs that go past the edge of the page, but not have them be annoying and flopping all over the place as it would be. And so one at a time, you build these sections and it creates the map, the story map. And if you want to change different settings, you click here. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but it just gives you an idea of what it looks like. And I'll say sometimes you're heartened because you could say, oh, I don't want a logo, or I don't want these. Other times there still could be additional things they might want to do. For example, it does give you a choice of color schemes, but it doesn't give you an infinite choice. And sometimes universities require people to use certain color schemes. So this one happens to have a little bit less options, although there are others that have more. And of course, these are the things that change over time as templates evolve. And also, if you do take these and host them on your own server, you have even more ability to change them. But what I've found is that in most of these, you can do such a tremendous amount, and you have so much ability to customize that you just wind up living with a few things that you can't do, especially considering that you can do this all without knowing any coding. And again, in this nice user template, which again, as Ashley has said, has definitely changed and gotten much easier over the past few years, but especially since this page exists. And look, now it knows it looks like you have created a new story. And even asks you to refresh. So here's this that I just created. This has already picked up that it exists, and now I can manage it from this section. Creating a good story that's compelling, we all know, is not an easy task, but at least the technology behind taking that information and making it available online is much better. And especially if you want to feature maps, using this version or using sort of Esri story maps greatly increases the capabilities. You have no maps to feature, that's okay. You can still use story maps as basically your interactive website designer. And the hardest part would be designing the maps. Well, sorry, the hardest technological part would be putting the maps together. But if you're interested in that, then I suggest, let me get out of this. I suggest, come over here, that you tune in on May 23rd at 2 p.m., where it's sort of the follow-on to this presentation, which is how do you build those maps? You want to make a story map, that's great. Now you want to put maps in it, or perhaps you don't want to build a story map. You just want to use maps themselves. You want to embed a map in a website. We're going to focus on how do you use the mapping interface for ArcGIS Online. And I will say that there's lots of information on this. There's by no means are we the exclusive providers of information and professional development. Esri has a whole bunch of stuff. There's lots of information online. Your own universities likely have courses, or you may even have somebody similar to myself who works in geospatial technology in cooperative extension. But one of the things we've been trying to do in Map Assist, and I've been trying to do through different grants and my participation in the Design-a-thon, is have things out there for folks who aren't already finding that information either useful, or they just don't even know it exists. And perhaps even this webinar will force people to find out more about what's going on in their own backyard.
Shane, there's a few questions in the chat, and I'm going to focus on some quick answers, I think, at first. Lisa Phelps is asking, do you know the cost for story maps?
Yeah, so the cost for story maps depends on who you are. If you're using your public account to make your story maps, which is not supposed to be used for commercial purposes, but your public account, there's no cost to that. That's completely free. Esri, the company, they could decide to change that tomorrow and charge. There was a bunch of questions as to whether or not that would happen a few years ago. It seems like that's not going to happen from everything that I can tell, but any company obviously can change their policies. But for now, it's free, and from everything I can tell for the foreseeable future, it will be. If you're not in that category, or you want to get the subscription account, it depends on who you are. If you're in K through 12 throughout the country, it's free. Anybody can get a subscription or organizational account for their school. If you have any questions about that, either search, well, if you go to Esri's website, you'll find it, look for Connect Ed and GIS, or get in touch with me and I can send you that information. If you want home use or a nonprofit, those are $100 a year. If you're somebody different than that, the prices vary from then on up. So if you want to try this, go ahead, create a public account today for free. It literally takes probably a minute, and you'd have an account you can use for everything except the crowdsource map. If you have, again, a university, go and find out. It likely is free. If there's some cost to you or your organization, it's probably fairly minimal. Or if you don't have access to that and you just want to try it out yourself, and you're willing to pay $100 to try it, go ahead, and that gives you an entire year of access to the fancier version of the license, and you can try out all of the different features under that home use provision.
So to follow up on the crowdsource concept, Catherine has asked, would you discuss how you might use maps to identify flood damage, things like crops, weakened road surfaces, residential damage, and photos, where individuals might post their damage? We have had several severe flooding, and this might be helpful. What are your thoughts about that application?
Yeah, well, and I think the question, of course, is whether or not this story map is the best way to do it. It could very well be. There's lots of ways that people can send pictures in and you can post them online. So I'm not saying that you would have to use story maps for that necessarily, but if you were going to use story maps for that, even the crowdsource map, which is super easy to set up, would be perfectly usable for that. And all you would have to do is basically create the name of the map, set a few basic settings and click publish. And you could send a very short link to people that would let them on any smart device or on their computer submit a photo and provide information. So if you have people on the ground that want to take information submitted to you, it's perfect for that. If you're thinking, oh, let's get some imagery from flood damage and then look through it and try to identify it, that's a whole different ball of wax, because somebody would have to take that imagery and put it into the map first. But the sort of the citizen participation in contributing data, something like the crowdsource map would be perfect for that. Ideally, the crowdsource map template would let you configure and set different drop-down menus or put different data fields so you could get even more information than just the picture. Right now, you can type in whatever text you want, which is useful. But ideally, you'd like them to be able to have categories, for example, to say that this is, I don't know, a flooded street or a car that's underwater or somebody who needs rescue. I mean, there would be an ideal world you could do that, and it may be coming, but I think that would be perfectly good use for it. And it's very easy to set up. And again, it's designed so that if you're looking at it on a phone, it knows that that's what you are on, and it changes the way that it looks to let you submit it. And especially if you set it up that people didn't have to log in at all. All you have to do is send people the link by text on their phone or email, or have it on your website and have them click on it, and they could be right there on their phone, quick take a picture and submit the information. And it could either show up on the map automatically, as we mentioned, or you could have it screened before it shows up. Yeah, there's a lot of possibilities for that.
So to do the crowdsourcing, you just have to have a paid account. So the $100 account would do that.
Yes,
Possibly.
I don't want to speak to the licensing and the way that it works. I don't work for Esri, and B, I don't know how they would police things or what the viewpoint is. But yes, that license would let you do it. Whether or not it gives you the permission to do that in any way, I don't know what it means. But certainly, if you had that, you could try out all of these things to see how it worked. Definitely.
But maybe with your institution, that possibly might be a fit. So that would be a question that you would need to ask.
Yep.
Okay.
Definitely.
There's another question from Renee Wallace about how do you link to websites within these story maps?
Oh, yeah. So it depends on which story map you're working on. But if you go back here, once you get into this, there's two places you can have websites. One, you can have them, if you wanted to link to a website here. So if I said this is a story map and I wanted that to link to a website, I would just click on this link button, and then it would give me the ability to put in whatever link I wanted. If you wanted to feature this, a website as part of this, what you would do is go back to this section and say that you want to feature a web page and then put that link in here. So there's two ways. You can either feature the web page here as an interactive embedded web page, or you can put links to the web pages out here. I will mention just on web pages that there is an issue when you're trying to display insecure websites. And I don't know how much people know what an insecure versus secure website is, but if you've ever looked at a website and you see a little lock on the screen up here, that means that it's secure. Or if it's HTTPS, that means that it's secure. If it's not HTTPS and it's HTTP, that means it's insecure. And once you start embedding websites inside of other websites, you become a developer, a web developer, whether you know it or not. And this isn't an Esri issue. This is a web security reality that if you have a secure web page, like a story map, you cannot feature an insecure web page inside of it. So if your extension web page is not secure, you could not feature it here. Also, there are other web pages that are specifically designed so you can't embed them in something else. That will be blocked as well. So a lot of them show up fine. And of course, that doesn't limit you because, for example, if your extension website doesn't work, it won't embed, you could always take a screenshot of it, feature the screenshot here, and then put a link saying explore on our website so that people would see what it looks like here and then come over here and click the link, which would open your website in another tab. So there's lots of ways that you could do that. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you, Shane. At this time, we have about 5 minutes. I don't know if there's any other questions or anything you want to wrap up with. We do encourage everyone to complete the webinar survey after. The link is in the chat, so please feel free to take a moment and complete the 2-question survey.
So what I'd do is just thank everyone who attended and also thank Ashley and Mark for arranging this. I am going to send this take this presentation, convert it to a PDF, and post it on the Learn page, which I should still be able to do after the fact, correct?
Yes,
think I
and
could.
the recording will be available in a couple of days at the
Yep.
same Learn event in which you registered.
So hopefully this gave people a taste of the possibility of story maps, maybe got their head churning about how they could use it. Again, what is the right story? How does it fit? That takes some time and energy to think about, but I think this is extremely exciting about what we can do, especially considering the fairly low bar for technical knowledge. And I hope to see a lot of these being used in extension for outreach and engagement. And when they are, I would love to be able to feature them here on this map. So please, if you have questions, feel free to get in touch with me directly. But if you have examples of maps or tales about maps, go to this website, click on this share tab, and go ahead and send them in.
Thank you. Thank you, Shane. We really appreciate it. All this information gives folks a lot to think about, and it's exciting that you can actually go get your free account. They might even hopefully try that this afternoon while it's fresh on their minds.
Exactly.
If there are any other questions, as Shane indicated, he is open for emails, and we'll be having another webinar in just a few weeks. And so we encourage you to join us for that webinar. I was going to go pull the actual date for you. That is going to be on May the 23rd. Yeah, May the 23rd.
On the bottom of the screen.
Thank you. May the 23rd, and I'll put the Learn event in the chat window if you want to click on that and you would like to go ahead and register. That will help get you there and get reminders sent to you for the next webinar. Thank you again, Shane, and we really appreciate your time today.
Great, thanks.